All right, so I'm gonna go get started as we have quite a bit of material to cover tonight. So welcome again to our series of Zuhlke webinars. Tonight we will be talking about how to choose the right mobile framework that fits to your business needs. So we will be providing some examples and also shared some of the lesson learned. So before we get started, I'd like to go quickly through some of what are the housekeeping rules. On the right hand side, you will be of the bar of the group webinar. In case you're just not familiar with these type of tools, there is a questions widget which you can expand, and in there you will be able to ask questions. We will have Q&A sessions at the end of this webinar, and we will do our best to cover all the questions that will be asked. Okay. Say that, just feel free to leave it there. So we'll do also what we can to answer them also offline after this webinar. So you might probably have noticed that you are on mute. So tonight we will be talking, and just please answer the questions in the panel part. Okay, so we're ready to go. So one thing I wanted to add before I move on in presenting who's going to be speaking tonight. We have noticed in the past few years the approach of across industry of mobile first. This has been driven obviously by the big wave of smartphones, and since today probably I know everybody has got one. So that's why strategies from a development perspective are focusing on mobiles. Therefore, we decided to give you a little bit more understanding, and take an objective view of how this is developing in the past years, and more are the trends and the examples in the market, and also what the other big techs doing. All right, so let's move on to the speakers, the panel of tonight. Tonight we have myself. My name is Antonio, and I am a senior business development manager here at Zuhlke in Hong Kong. We also have Ben. Ben is advanced software engineer, and he covers mobile platforms. Hi, Ben.
How you doing, guys?
Hi. Good. So we also have Ken. Ken is advanced software engineer. And he also specializes in the mobile development. Hi, Ken.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I've been in Zuhlke for about 1.5 years, and I've been working on some interesting projects in the virtual bank space and also financial products comparison apps as well. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken.
Sharing my experience today.
Thank you.
So I should probably supplement that based off Ken. Mine was a bit short and curt, just to be conscious of time. But yeah, I've done a bit of PWAs myself, cool. And native and hybrid. So I've worked in all three, but mostly in native.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you, guys. Very good. So I think let's get started with the first part of this webinar, and to the first questions to you guys. Lorraine, do you want to move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the first part is what are really the first more important things to know before actually developing a new mobile app. So let's go to, I believe in this case will be Ben, right?
That'll be me. All right. So what we have here are, just to simplify it down, 5 key points that you need to take into consideration when you're deciding on what architecture or platform you should use when developing. So target audience, who is it going to, what is it that you're trying to deliver to them? Target platforms, well, in this case, the device is mobile, but there's a multitude of technologies. The 3 obviously we're focusing on is native, hybrid, and PWA, or a website. what app features and functionality that your app needs to reach its target when delivering to your audience. Timeline and budget, like how quick do you need it out the door? How much room for budget do you have for hiring the people that are needed to develop the app? This obviously varies quite a bit based on which platform you choose. And developer skills. There are a multitude of languages out there, and the ones you need for mobile development all vary. So this is all these key points you need to take into account when you're deciding on what front end you should use for your application. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So, and just to that slide, one point, I mean, we will be mainly looking at the development framework tonight in this session, but we also touch base a little bit more on some other points, like in terms of teams and how to get how this fits into also the product development phase. Yeah, let's go back to the next questions. Thank you. So now we have between the native and hybrid and PWA, which stands for progressive web apps. So what are the differences and why does it matter? So let's move to the next page. I think Ken is over to you.
Thanks, Antonio. So in this slide, we want to give you an overview of the mobile landscape. So front-end mobile apps are broken down broadly into 3 categories. So the first 2 can be found in the marketplace. These are native and hybrid frameworks. And we'll cover the benefits and the costs of being in the marketplace later on. And then the third category is progressive web apps, which can be found in the browser. And so you can see on the far left-hand side is the most powerful technologies. These are possibly the more complex ones to write. And then as you move towards the right-hand side, it becomes more like a write once, and then all platforms can access. So you can see a gradual shift from left to right. So on the next slides, we'll cover some of these technologies in more detail. So in terms of native and hybrid apps, which can be found in the marketplace, there are some common pros and cons. So the pros of being in the marketplace is that you'll potentially have greater reach because users can easily find your app in the App Store, especially if you've done well and you've got yourself featured. This has helped some businesses to become very successful in the past. Also, there's a really good rating system. So this enables more transparency from your users. They'll be able to provide feedback on what they really like about the app or what they don't like about it. And this can help to generate more iterations and improve your product to attract even more people. However, being in the marketplace also has its costs. If you want to make revenue from these kinds of apps, the marketplaces will take 15% of the app revenue. This has been reduced from the 30%, which was previous, but it's still quite a substantial amount of your revenue, which you'll need to take into consideration. Also, apps that need to go through the marketplace are subject to a review by the respective app stores on every update, on every release. So this leads to potential risk of being rejected and impacting your the cycle of development and increasing costs, etc. Also, some other things to take into consideration is user acquisition costs. So even if you're building a mobile app, you'll also likely need to build a website as well in order to get your users who are searching for an app via search engines. And also, in order to get users to actually download the app, you're likely to need to invest in social media marketing and SEO optimization things as well. And then lastly, also need to consider a high annual maintenance cost of running native or hybrid apps. Studies estimate that it's roughly 20% of the upfront cost to build it on average. And with PWAs, which we'll cover later, the annual maintenance cost is around 25% less. So on the next slide, which Ben will cover, he'll dive deeper into some of the overall numbers.
Yeah, just a point I'd like to supplement from the previous slide on the marketplace or app store. So you have the Apple Play Store and the Google Play Store. You aren't guaranteed to immediately get your product featured. You actually need to make sure you conform to a whole bunch of guidelines, like you have accessibility, you've got localization, which also cost extra money because there's service out there and it takes a long time. So even though the marketplace is there, it's nice, it's still not free. There is a slight caveat to it. But yeah. So on the next slide for other costs that come up with, as we said, hidden maintenance costs. So medium-sized app, there's a few estimates, about 60 to 130K per year. However, a few of these costs are not applicable to PWAs, so that's another thing to consider. So amongst these costs that you have to consider that don't always apply to PWAs, app update submissions. So whenever you update your app, it has to go through review. This takes time. Sometimes you get feedback. They don't immediately release it to the store. Takes time. That's cost again, development time, and it iterates. If it's smooth, great, but it's not always the case. And we're looking at about 2,400 USD a year just on app update submissions alone. Another one is development tools, libraries, and support. Now, not to say that PWAs don't need this. However, for Google Play and Apple, you need accounts to start development, which has a cost to it. And you need a lot more tools potentially than you do with web. But we're looking at 1,200 year minimum on that. And another one is Android and iOS updates. So these two, I mean, we have WWDC for iOS, and that releases new features every year. So you need to go through whether you want to support it, potential deprecation. If you want to support the new one, it could deprecate old libraries, and then you need to make sure you don't break users that use old versions of your app. This doesn't exist on PWAs. You don't have to conform to legacy stuff, because as soon as they got the website, they're done, they're good. You don't have to force them to update and download a new one. Yeah, so on the next slide, we'll move on to Antonio, I think, for part 3.
Yeah, it's a so let's now in this part look more in details, right? Really, what we for each of these platforms, what are the actual pros and cons, right? Then can you give us a little bit of my better view of that? Next, please.
Yeah, so always good to hear what the pros and cons are before deciding. So we'll run through some of these. So we'll start with native, which most people look at first when they're deciding on what they want to do for mobile. So start with the pros. Best user experience, quotation marks. In that, you are what's called very close to metal in development. It's directly from Apple or Android. You're smooth and fast. You have the closest thing you can to the best user experience in that case. It doesn't have to go through any bridging, and it's not as restricted as compared to the other technologies. Continuous native software updates. So as soon as Apple or Android release something, you get it. So haptics, facial recognition, NFC, all that stuff. You get that as soon as they release it. The other frameworks, you have to wait a bit. Native technology is less likely to go obsolete compared to other frameworks, in the sense that Android and iOS phones are very widespread in the world. There will be jobs and a need for them in that sense. So the cons of native development, there's unfortunately a very high development cost, because for starters, if you want to cover both with native only, you need 2 teams, one for Android, one for iOS. So that increases the overhead for development costs already. And a longer time to market, as I said, it has to go through a review process that Apple and Google Play have. So sometimes you get rejected, it takes time before you can get it out there. And because of this, the skill set needed to develop on these, it is a little harder to hire iOS and Android developers. It's a bit more of it's not as a popular language, so they're a bit harder to find. And when you do find them, the code standard isn't always there. So that is another overhead. And because it is slightly more nuanced development, because each one isn't a unified experience. Each one has its nuances on how to develop on iOS versus Android. There's a longer training time to get someone up to speed of the development quality that you want. So moving on to the next slide, I think Ken will cover.
Example of like some, or iOS native apps that you might know that we can reference to, or examples that you have worked on in terms of cons or real life example of where you had a challenge from a native perspective.
I mean, yeah, I've done iOS development for like 5-6 years, and all of these points are from personal experience.
Okay.
I can't say. I think the biggest one is definitely the app. I think the one that was the biggest pain point that we ever hit was if we ever hit any bugs that were quite like showstoppers for users, we were blocked by the App Store. Like we couldn't get a quick immediate hotfix out. Apple have updated this a little bit, where if you mark the release as this is needed as soon as possible, they will kind of overlook their rigorous due process to get it out there as soon as possible. But you still have that blocker, unlike PWAs, where you just release it as soon as you want. So you never have to worry about that that issue. But it was a big problem.
A bottleneck basically across doing the development.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really bad bottleneck.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. So yeah, we can move next.
Okay, so next we'll be covering hybrid frameworks. And the two hottest technologies in this space are React Native and Flutter. So if you search some startup job descriptions, or look at the technologies which a lot of startups are incorporating for their mobile apps, you'll likely see one of these two for the following reasons. So with React Native and Flutter, you have a single source of truth. So you'll be able to produce the majority of the code for both platforms by just writing one set of code. This gives you potentially higher base audience off the bat as well. And because of this, you'll find it less costly to develop and to maintain. And from some sources' estimations, hybrid development is around 30% cheaper than native app development approach. Also, an added benefit of React Native and Flutter is that you can sometimes push updates to users quicker and via a method called over-the-air updates. So your users may be able to update their app seamlessly without having to go back into the App Store because it'll just do it in the background for you. But this only works for very minor changes. And as a result, for simple apps especially, you'll receive the most bang for your buck by choosing one of these technologies, as it performs relatively similar to native technologies, but can be produced faster. The cons of React Native and Flutter, however, is that CPU-intensive features can be slower than native because it's not as close to the metal. And in some circumstances, you may require developers with native knowledge as well, because sometimes the hybrid frameworks or the libraries that the community has produced might not cover your specific needs. But this is a relatively unlikely scenario once the technology is matured and there's a lot of community support behind it. Next, also, you may find a not fully standardized UI out of the box. So, for example, you may need to, if you have very specific designs that you want on both iOS and Android, and you want it to look the same for every type of user, no matter what platform, you may need to do a little bit of tweaking in the styling just to match it up. Also, with the very leading edge features like previously when NFC was first released, or biometrics fingerprint scanning, this wasn't available straight away for hybrid apps. It was available on native first, and then obviously the teams produce support for that later on. So in the next slide, please, Antonio.
Yeah.
So we'll cover some of the specific pros and cons of each of these two technologies as well. So the pros of React Native is that it's a very popular framework, and it's derived from React, which is the most popular web development framework out there. Because it's written in JavaScript, JavaScript developers will find React Native relatively easier to pick up. Secondly, with React Native, it has a very active library community. Most of the things that you need will probably be supported as a library, and with people fixing issues, etc. The cons of React Native is that JavaScript code actually needs to be converted to machine code in real time over what we call the JavaScript bridge. This can lead to performance issues for large calculations. So you have to bear that in mind if you have any features which require high performance. I think, Ben, you had an example, didn't you, of this issue in the past?
Yeah, unfortunately, this on a previous project, they were native, and they're like, oh, okay, after 5 years of this product being out, we know to simplify it, and we want to start again on React Native, so we can target both platforms, because previously it was just on one. So like, okay, two birds, one stone, simplified technology, should be easy, right? I had my doubts going in, but I was like, okay, whatever, I can learn a bit of React Native as I go along. Immediately, it became very apparent that because of the lack of multi-threading and going through the JavaScript bridge, what the experience they needed was to download a lot of data and then store it for offline use. But sometimes this data could be massive, and it was no simple task to shove off some of the work onto other threads to do work, because React Native did not make this easy to do. And like previously, like you said, React hybrid frameworks are a little bit slower with these calculations. I don't think that was as big a problem. It was definitely just the lack of multi-threading. So I think like Flutter handles it a little better compared to Java. There's a massive debate of why JavaScript on React Native hasn't allowed multi-threading. So that was a pain point for me personally.
So with your particular issue, were you able to overcome it by writing native code specifically, or was the issue still there?
No, we overcame it eventually, but it was not an easy experience to we had to really become familiar with some of the React features and how to handle the work. And essentially, it took longer to pass the data because we had to do multiple passes over it over time, rather than just handling it on a background thread, and as soon as it's ready it comes up. We just had to do over a couple of cycles without blocking the main thread. So we did get there eventually, but if I had multi-threaded, it would never have been an issue in the first place.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so onto the pros of Flutter. This is a very close to native performance, and it has a great set of pre-built features by Google as well. Google is giving a very frequent update schedule, and they're very keen on making Flutter the go-to for hybrid development. So they have aims to make it very popular for web development as well, just like React. So a few things to note is in a survey carried out by Stack Overflow, a leading website for developers to find solutions to bugs and issues. They released a survey, and they found that Flutter was the third most loved new technology, beating React, which was, I think, was 8th. And setting up a project in Flutter and managing the different library imports and dependencies is simpler in Flutter than React Native, in my experience. And I've also found that relatively quicker to deploy than React Native. To actually build the app and then deploy it is faster. So this could lead to some incremental savings with your continuous integration and continuous deployment of automated pipelines. Also, I found the testing process of Flutter to be nicer than React Native as well, possibly because it's a newer technology. Google's really thought about the challenges and issues that React Native had, so they've tried to fix that. In terms of the cons of Flutter, it's written using Dart, so it's not a difficult language to learn, but it's another language to learn for some developers. Since most front-end engineers know JavaScript, their natural go-to would be React Native. And also, there's a relatively less mature library environment. Most custom needs will, however, be developed in time as this technology matures. Okay, thanks. Next, Ben will be
related to Flutter. So many cases, some of the cases where clients might have basically declined use of Dart to go on Flutter because of the it's not that common language, it's very new. So in that regard, comparing Dart as a language to other like JavaScript or so on, how familiar it is, and what in your opinion, guys, what would be like the learning curve, to learn this new language?
Personally, the learning curve isn't that high. In some ways, JavaScript is a little nicer than Dart. It has some, more, I would say, modern features than Dart. But I know that Dart is getting improved a lot alongside Flutter. So hopefully we can see improvements in that. But in terms of the learning curve, it's very similar to JavaScript, but just a different syntax.
Regarding between the difference, because I've seen, I have my little understanding between what Flutter is. It looks more like a widget based. Actually, it's described as a widget based kind of a platform, right? So how that is different compared to React Native, for instance?
Yeah. So Google has designed Flutter using widgets. So everything is a widget, and they have built so many components, pre-made ones. So you can just go on YouTube now and type in Flutter, Flutter.io, and then you'll see loads of videos made by the Google development team, and they have very engaging videos showing the widgets of the week, and this is really nice for new developers wanting to learn this technology, because they can see them in action and see why they'd be useful in some of the use cases.
Thanks.
Reaction.
Yeah.
I'm just going to that point. Resources for Flutter when you go on YouTube are from Google. They're really pushing people trying to learn it, and they document it really well. React Native, there is, but it's mostly community based. It's like people who use it and like it. It's more passion driven. So the resources are there, but it's like a third party essentially.
Okay, so it's now is that Google kind of driving the community to grow, and instead like React is way more organic in that way. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
React wants to make the platform as simple as possible, and then let the community do the rest. Whereas Google has taken the other approach of trying to do as much as they can in-house to help developers. So two different approaches, and both, as you can see, have been fairly successful in their own ways.
Thank you. Yeah, we can move to next.
Right, so I'll cover the progressive web app part. All right, so progressive web apps, the whole reason progressive web apps, I think the whole idea was Steve Jobs brought up the idea many years ago, but now Google have fully adopted the whole term of progressive web apps, and the whole idea is that it should be a website that feels native. So what are the pros of them? So lower cost, it uses web. If they have JavaScript, you develop it and it's a browser. You don't have to worry about two platforms. They have a browser, which I'm pretty safe to say I think everyone does. The only exception being if they use IE, but that's a lost case anyway. Faster time to market, because you don't have to go through a review process with any app stores. You're out the door. As soon as you press deploy, it's there, it's done. They have access to your website. So you'll beat any competitors to the market if you decide to go PWA and they decide to go native. You can validate ideas as quickly as possible if it's a POC. For speed, PWA is the way you want to go. So as I mentioned before, similar experience to native. The whole idea is they're trying to make it feel as native as possible, so that there's very little discrepancy between them. And as you can see, then in some cases can load a bit faster because of PWAs. Initially it might not, but then once it stores using a web session, it will store all the content. You go back and it's immediately up. No installation process. So this is obviously a point with a lot of people. There was a survey. There's the top 3 apps that fight for your home screen position, and those are the most used apps on someone's phone from their home screen. No one likes installing a new app. Lots of people marketing know this. Like if you go to a website, like, have you tried installing our app? Most people just ignore that. So there's less friction to onboard users. However, PWAs do give you the option to put it to your home screen, but it's not a necessity to continue using.
Just quick thing there. So do you mean you can have the same experience as you have for like a native app, but you don't need to install anything on your phone?
Close. Okay. It's not a one-to-one experience in certain aspects, which we're about to cover, but the whole idea is, let's say it's a relatively simple app that doesn't need like the cutting edge stuff. It should feel pretty close to the same, and you can access it from the browser immediately. And then if you install it on the home screen, it gets rid of the browser and it just immediately pops up and it feels like it.
Okay, so but that's a performance. In terms of performance, does it change much whether I install it or not?
No, it doesn't. It's the same across both. It's exactly the same. It's just the feeling, the UX changes slightly. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Moving on to cons. So this is probably a very big consideration. If you need some of the cutting edge features like face identification, screenshot blocking, this is usually to cover sensitive details when taking screenshots. You should probably not use a PWA. And this is even worse because it's not even a universal experience across Android and iOS. iOS are a bit more reluctant to allow a lot of the latest features available to progressive web apps. There was an article recently about web push notifications. iOS still hasn't allowed them. So if you need that, push notifications, and a lot of things do, it's still a bit of an uphill battle there. Yeah. Another thing about native experience is gestures. That's one of the powers of mobile development, is you have gestures, and everyone loves gestures. It does include them, they just don't feel as responsive. But again, if your app's simple enough, it's fine. How do they deal performance-wise versus native hybrid apps? Again, simple app with relatively few gestures and stuff, as opposed to doing something like a game, which has very complex state and events and what have you. Probably not a good idea for progressive web app. You're probably better going native for that. In some cases, hybrid is also okay, but again, native is probably the way you want to go if you're going to do something like games, anything with high computational power. And then I think we'll go on to the next one, which Ken will cover on some examples of progressive web apps.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So on this slide, we want to highlight all the top companies that are embracing PWA technology. So obviously this includes Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tinder, Uber, And also, notably, e-commerce websites are particularly well suited to PWAs as well, because most consumers don't want to have to download an app in order to purchase what they need. They just want to go straight from Google search into the shopping experience. And also, I'd like to highlight that the two bottom right companies, Flipkart and Jumia, they are based in India and Africa. And typically these places have lower end devices or low data plans. And these two companies have been able to really be successful because of the support that they have on PWAs.
So Ken, we could say that,
next
just quickly, we would say that, so we do strategy if we are entering like one of these emerging markets, right, where smartphones are not very well spread out, and you know, they have a low capacity device and a lower band network. So the PWA could be a good strategy basically to enter these markets, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And also, so we because it's gaining more popularity, we decided to compare some of the experiences in these apps. So for me, I tried out Uber in both native app and as a PWA. And I found that in the native app, there was smoother animations. There were certain features like drop pin on locations, which were nice on native. Other features like map mode were loaded automatically. And overall, I got a better user experience from using that native app. So I feel like I'm more likely to use Uber because it has a native app, a dedicated native app. Ben also tried YouTube, so could you share some of your thoughts there?
Basically, I don't want to leave my browser to look at YouTube. That's basically it. So the fact that I use it and it feels relatively native, that's why it's nice to have both, right? So in your case, it's not that Uber only because they have native, it's because they have the option of both, but you're more likely to use one or the other based on how it's capable. As far as YouTube's concerned, it was the same experience across both, so I might as well stick to the browser because that's what I'm using most of the time anyway. So that's why I prefer the web part of it, or the PWA part.
Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, I think we picked up this PWA just to show the audience, since it's an emerging trend. There's a lot being said around it, so it was worth actually with some examples. But let's move on. So we have this other session where we want to see really what is the best choice for you in terms of picking up between these different framework. And I think the guys put together like a few scenarios, so that kind of shows that. I think this time we'll start to go back to you, Ben, right, with scenario 1. Can you go to next, please? Thanks.
All right. So first scenario, you have an existing native app. So like the one I brought up earlier, we had an iOS and we decided to switch to hybrid. So what are the benefits that you can see here that we also got? So in the case that you actually have both iOS and Android, what you gain in benefit is you consolidate a split code base. So like I said, you've got Android, you've got iOS, trying to do parallel development and keep them in sync. That's always a headache. If you switch to hybrid, you've got one. You release, you've got to both markets. Dev team. So you can reduce the cost of the dev team by downsizing. You only need a fewer developers as opposed to splitting across two. You can iterate faster. So again, because, well, in theory, you can iterate faster. You're as fast as your development to one code base rather than based on both. So whether you should do this will also depend on your app's complexity. So you won't immediately get this benefit guaranteed, because you may have to spend time phasing out legacy code to the previous app when you do this. So that is another consideration in that scenario. But if you only have one mobile OS supported, it's the same above, but you don't have to worry about a split code base. You could just potentially, depending on how simple your app is, you could just start the development on the hybrid immediately while slowly phasing out the other one, and you've got access to both. as you can see here, we have adding. We don't have switching to PWA, although you could do that, but in this case, it isn't advised. You can just add a PWA on top of whatever your choice is. You might not choose to switch over to a hybrid. You might keep as is, but I would still advise a PWA because it's relatively minuscule development cost. It's a website in that you may already have a website to support your app. I mean, most already do. That is usually a cost, because if you have anything to do with holding user account details, you'll need a website to do that, for them to log in, sign up, all that jazz.
So Ben,
you might as well
any existing company that has added a PWA to their the range of apps?
Yeah, previously the ones we talked about, YouTube and Uber, are two of them. All those, like they started natively, and then Google pushed, like, the PWA is an emerging thing. They said, okay, well, might as well make it a PWA.
Thank you.
Because they just added it because it's such a simple add. Google gives you plenty of tools to convert over to PWAs. It's pretty simple. And as I said, two birds with one stone, the website, and you get the PWA experience. And again, relatively quick and easy.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So we have another scenario, for scenario 2, I think Ken will cover. And then, yeah.
So if you have a existing hybrid app, should you switch to native? We think it's probably unnecessary, because most of the features offered by hybrid apps most of the features offered by native apps are covered in hybrid technologies currently. Creating a native app would mean you are splitting the code base, which means potentially you'll have to hire more developers, iOS dedicated and Android dedicated developers. And this may lead to the teams becoming out of sync in development. You may have iOS features develop faster than Android features, and you'll have to manage that from a project management perspective. But we would say you should do this if you feel that the hybrid or framework restricts you too much, or if you really need those extra performance gains by going native. A particular example that I can share is Airbnb. They decided to go from React Native to specific iOS and Android apps. And I feel they did this because they wanted to provide the very best user experience for everybody. And because they're a very successful company, they were able to afford that transition. Yeah. And on the right-hand side,
quick question for you, like, Ken, regarding that point, right? So, how makes the difference? So the gain, right, for Airbnb to make that shift is really a gain in terms of a user experience only, or is it when we talk about that, is it the delay, or it just feels more natural? What are actually the advantages?
Yeah, I think that Airbnb had a very clear plan of what specific user experiences they wanted to provide, and trying to achieve those specific goals using hybrid technology. They found they were doing extra work to enable that, rather than just, if they switch to native, they have a lot more.
It's more for efficiency, let's say.
Yeah, more efficiency. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it is more that they're saying that the app had got to a point where adding new complicated features that they wanted to add was just trying to draw blood from a stone. It was just proving to be too difficult, trying to wrangle the framework to do what they wanted. So, like, if we were just native, we wouldn't have to deal with any of this headache. So, like, to supplement that, only do if you have those points. Another one is you have a very clear idea of how you're going to handle switching to, having a split code base. It's not something you do lightly.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, go ahead.
And the final point on this slide is, if you have a hybrid app already, should you add a PWA? Probably, because just as mentioned in the previous slide, having this browser-based experience will be beneficial for your company. Next slide. And this one, Ben, you'll be covering this one.
Yeah, so your third scenario, POC, you want a new product. So you've got an MVP, a novel idea. So in the case you need speed out the door, you need it to get it to customers as soon as possible to validate your ideas. You're using Scrum methodology, you want to iterate, get some feedback, respond to that, release again, get constant feedback. Marketers love this. To drive how you take the direction of your product based on the feedback from the customers. In this scenario, you can't beat PWAs. Like I said, you don't have to go through any of the headache of all the previous stuff like setup, getting the developers, discuss. You get a website out, you make it feel, you follow the PWA guidelines from Google. They have a tool, Lighthouse, to make sure you cover all the checkboxes before you release. Get it out there. You get some feedback, make some changes, push it again. It's pretty seamless and painless in that regard compared to native and hybrid. But let's say there's a massive planning stage for your product, and it's relatively waterfall, essentially. Very rigid requirements. They're not going to change much. You're going to stick to them. You might say, well, I don't need a PWA now. No, we've never established that you must have a PWA. But you can benefit from it, like always. The cost for doing it and how much support there is currently that they're pushing from Google, it just makes sense to do it. And I think that about covers it for the scenarios.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. So, just before I move to this one, I want to remember everybody, please, we're almost done. So just feel free to ask questions while we go through the rest, so that we can pick them up at the end. So yeah, last part. So we wanted to add a kind of a section where looking at what are the team and skill set. So you're going to essentially to build and scale the product, right? But most importantly, I wanted to kind of cover a little bit on an area. So something that resonates in your internal teams, right? In the conversational team. So I pick up one of our model, one of our services, like what we do at Zuhlke as a running a startup, which resonates exactly what happens in a company itself, inside a company. So what I know, this is a typical process between ideation, workshop, design thinking, and then until we move to delivery using agile methodology and so on and so forth. But one point that I really wanted to stress out in this, when you go to this process of understanding of what you need to build and what strategy you should use, right, in terms of choosing the right framework. There are a few components in terms of resources, like talent that you need to bring around this table. So the team that you have to leverage, and those are skill sets like designers, developers, and business owners as well. But most importantly, one of the things that we see in most cases are not engaged into this process are customers. You need to understand who are you going to serve. Like example that can put together, like what also the idea that Airbnb had to essentially get to that type of user experience, because they want their customers to really feel have their look and feel exactly corresponding to their target. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to add for this slide. I think we can move to next, and over to you, Ben. So we're going to cover quickly the key takeaways of all.
Yeah, so we can wrap up here for some of the key takeaways. Although I do believe I spoke about most of this. I think this is Ken's deal now. You can wrap up for us.
Oh. Okay.
Or do you want me to? It's up to you.
I'll do it. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation and taken a lot of the detailed information. So in terms of key takeaways, native apps are the most powerful and have access to most of the hardware features. Hybrid apps offer fast development cycles than native apps at a lower cost. And also PWAs are suitable for most use cases. We found that users' needs and business needs are mostly met with these technologies, and it enables these businesses to validate their ideas in the market faster. With PWA technology, they're pushing regular updates, like quarterly, adding more features and capabilities. I believe one of the ones that is missing at the moment is iOS push notifications. So we'll be keeping tabs on that one, and hopefully Apple will start supporting that soon. So PWAs are recommended if you operate on a tight budget and timelines. If you need to release to markets which have lower end devices or slow internet connections or limited data plans. Or thirdly, if you have an idea that you want to just validate very quickly before investing heavily in a native or hybrid solution.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ken, for wrapping up this session for us. So I'm going to ask the audience and see whether anybody has got a question. At the moment, I don't see anything there. Please do feel free to ask a question to Ken and Ben, or any points that you have probably noted and you would like to have learn more about it. So I don't see questions myself, Lorraine. I don't know if you.
I can see it. I don't see any minutes.
Okay, so
but the questions are in.
Here we go. We have question number one, which says, so what's your recommendation for the framework that works best for developing mobile games?
Right. I can talk about this a little bit. So native is usually the way you want to go, but there is the ability to do it with hybrid. It's not so bad. It depends how simple it is. But I think Flutter came out with one called, it begins with fire something. I can't remember it off the top of my head. And we had one of our friends developed Flappy Bird in it. Again, really simple, got the job done. If you want to go a bit more complex, especially with like 3D, you probably want to go native. And that native usually, when I say native, actually, it's not so native. It's using Unity, which again uses either JavaScript or C# script for development, but it's such a comprehensive tool for development. It's another thing to learn, actually, Unity. We didn't bring up Unity here because you can use it for app development, but it was developed pretty much solely for game development, and it has its own nooks and crannies and warts to kind of figure out on its own. I spent a year or two on that. So for 3D games, Unity is a good one to use.
Great, thank you, Ben. I think the other question we have got is, so what's the average time needed to build a new PWA app from scratch till to market?
So from my experience with this one I can think of is a previous project, an e-commerce project platform, and that took around 2 to 4 months to release the MVP. I know with hybrid and native solutions that would take longer, perhaps double that. Ben, what's your experience of releasing PWAs? How long has that taken?
Initially, they came to us, and I think they were expecting mobile. So we said, no, we'll do PWA, because they wanted something relatively simple, and they wanted it quick, and we did it in 2 months. 2.5.
2.5 months. Okay.
Yeah.
Depends on the scope.
It would have been 2 months. It would have been 2 months, but they threw in a clanger last minute, like, oh, we want this feature. Like, that wasn't what we originally agreed, so added a bit. So it was just less technology based. It was more client based, kind of throwing a spin in the works.
I can say that it will be within 2 to 3 months time, depending obviously on the scope of it, but pretty much that way it sits.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Let me see. Looks like we don't. We still have 4 minutes to go. I will probably, since I've got the chance here, I've got you guys here, I will ask you. Oh no, there is another question from the audience. Wait a second. Just came one. So would you say that once a company reaches maturity, it should opt for developing a native app in order to provide the best user experience?
I mean, pretty much that is kind of what we said. But again, it needs people with a lot of experience and know what they're doing. Because as I said, you're going to end up you're going to split the code base. And Airbnb had great success with it. but as Ken pointed out, it's because they were very, very mature.
Well, it looks like
you want
also,
to supplement that with anything?
I can supplement a little bit in this as well in terms of what my experience goes for, but it looks more in a sense what you guys say. Is just to wrap it up, is it's really related to the idea of what you're trying to reach, right? What's your customer needs, right? That looks like wrapping this up. Is that what you need? Is your customer in need of native apps or actually a PWAs? So what kind of skills you're trying to deliver? Yeah, over to you, Ken.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Ben said, and with the Airbnb example, I know that they in the past they had their sights on supporting AR and VR. So I think maybe some of the decisions to move to native was because they wanted to really be one of the first to provide those sort of features to the masses.
Thank you, guys. And any other more question, Lorraine? No, not yet. Maybe I can drop the questions that I wanted to ask you guys before. And quickly, we've got only a couple of minutes. In 1 minute, what do you think it takes to actually swap across these different platforms? If I have to move from from a hybrid to native, what does it take for me if I was a CTO or was business owner and I need to make that decision? Is it a smooth process? It does require what are the implication of that in your experience?
From hybrid to native.
Yeah, moving from hybrid to native, or vice versa. We explore.
I think yeah, out of all of the ways to do it, that's probably, as we said, that's probably the one that's going to be most costly. You really have to know what you're doing and make sure that is what you need to do. Like, don't just do it for the sake of doing it, for getting a modicum of performance. Like, if you can develop the features you need without too much difficulty, don't bother making that switch. But Airbnb decided to because they were constantly iterating, and as Ken said, they wanted to eventually provide support for AR, which is pretty needs stuff like the Metal library in iOS. I don't know about Android, so pretty close to the Metal stuff. If you're not pursuing that, don't bother.
Okay. Anything else you want to add as well, Ken, from your side, or you?
Not really. Ben's covered most of that. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Costly process to switch over. Yeah.
I think we are with this. This is it. I just wanted to say thank you to the audience that's taking the time to actually join this webinar tonight, and thank you so much to Ken and Ben. And I also wanted to share a particular thank you to the person you don't see actually is behind the scene helping us coordinating this effort tonight and helping us to go to the slide. Lorraine, you are there. We know. Thank you so much. And if anybody wants to actually reach out, so please you can scan the QR code or connect with me or my colleague Paulina. Thank you so much, everybody, and this is it for tonight. And have a wonderful rest of the evening. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.